Hey, Alan, I have some really exciting news.
What's that, Abby?
Which is that the movie that we've been working on for 6 years is now available to stream for free on Tubi.
Which one's this?
The film is called Voices Carry.
What's it about?
So it's a paranormal thriller where a generational mystery sinks its teeth into an isolated couple that's just looking for a fresh start. But it takes place on a spooky lake, so it's the perfect movie to watch this summer.
A little bit of aquatic horror, huh?
Exactly.
Who's in it?
So the film stars Gia Croverton from Evil and Fear the Night, Jeff Ayres from This Is Our Home, Jeremy Holm from The Ranger, and Geraldine Singer from Get Out. It's really some horror royalty. Also, I want to add that the film was written and directed by women, one of those women being me.
Very proud of you.
Very proud of you. Alan did a lot of very cool things on this movie, too.
Like what?
Alan did all of the production sound and all of the second unit photography.
Wow, that's impressive.
Very, very impressive. Voices Carry is now streaming for free on Tubi. Search Voices Carry and watch today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 200th episode of the Lunatics Radio Hour podcast. My name is Abby Brinker, and I'm sitting here with Alan Kudan.
Hello.
For our 200th episode, we really wanted to do something special, and this felt like a glaring oversight in the archives of the Lunatics Project.
There's no such thing. We are flawless.
Today, we are talking about one of the most recognizable figures in horror, the final girl. She is the person left standing when the monster is gone, the killer is defeated, and everyone else has fallen. But where did this character come from? And how did she evolve from a terrified survivor into one of horror's most important protagonists? The final girl is a character archetype commonly found in horror films, especially slasher movies. The term refers to the last surviving female character, who is typically the one who confronts the killer and survives the events of the story. The term final girl was initially coined by Carol J. Clover in 1987. Clover is an American scholar known for her work in film studies, gender studies, and, interestingly, Scandinavian literature. She taught for many years at the University of California, Berkeley, where her research explored topics ranging from medieval Scandinavian culture to modern film and pop culture. She is best known for developing the concept of the final girl. Her work helped bring greater academic attention to horror movies and their portrayal of gender violence and survival. Clover later expanded on the concept of the final girl in her book Men, Women, and Chainsaws from 1992. So for this book, she studied slasher films from the 1970s and 80s and defined the final girl as the lone survivor of a group that is targeted by a killer. She also observed that the final girl character typically has a final confrontation with the villain and either defeats them or survives until help arrives. Importantly, Clover also argued that these characters were often portrayed as more reasonable or cautious than their peers, frequently avoiding behavior such as drug use or casual sex that were common among the other characters in the movie. All of those characters typically ended up killed. We're going to get into examples, but Laurie Strode is a really good example of that, right? She's very pious. So today we're going to talk about the precursors for modern-day final girls, some examples throughout horror history, and the state of the final girl horror trope today. Our discussion is going to be a little bit academic in nature, but I think there's something more personal and emotional, perhaps, about the final girl trope to a lot of horror lovers out there.
Why is that?
Because I think growing up watching horror, which a lot of the times is made predominantly or was historically for men, there's something about seeing a woman survive and outsmart everybody, even though there's complications to that we're going to talk about, that I think resonates with people or resonated with people who grew up watching a lot of these slasher movies.
It has been my experience that women like horror more than men.
Yeah, but I don't think marketers and film studios knew that for a long time. So I talked to three women who have been very important over the years to the Lunatics Project in different ways. And I'm going to share some quick quotes from each of them on what final girls mean to them. The first is from our friend Sarah Luke. Quote, "I really kind of love the final girl trope because it goes against the standard of most other film genres. It's fun to watch powerful female leads, and horror films have the best ones. From a creative standpoint, it's really amazing that you can write a final girl as any demographic, and people are more open to connect with the character than with other types of films. Final girls are usually the underdog, and it's fun and relatable to watch them overcome struggle. They are resilient and smart, and when they win, we all feel like we win too." End quote. From our friend Kate Rotunda, quote, "Overall, I love the final girl trope in horror, but final girls exist on two sides of a coin. On one side, they can be feminist and badass depictions of women, fighting through their hardships and getting the better of whatever monster seeks to destroy them. On the other hand, however, the trope of the final girl perpetuates the pervasive need for horror to show women being physically and psychologically tortured in order to entertain the audience and earn their survival," end quote. And from our friends Mads O'Brien, quote, "As a horror fangirl, the final girl is a complicated topic. They straddle the line of horror subversion while also being a critique on loose or sexualized women. The final girl is typically mousy, shy, book-smart, and overall sexless. She's beautiful, but is often the butt of jokes because of her lack of experience. I'm thinking of Laurie Strode from Halloween or Sidney Prescott from Scream. They're forced through adversity. Many are physically assaulted. They lose everything: boyfriends, family, animals, to the serial killers or monsters. However, final girls are also the lens that the audience experiences horror through. They are the one we're meant to root for and empathize with. They are the ones who are smart, who pick up weapons, or figure out the catch behind killing the creature. They are the ones that ensure the story can end with survival, even though they are saddled with the trauma. So I like final girls because I always identify with them. And I love that role being explored further. I'm thinking of Chris in Get Out or Grace in Ready or Not. Final girls can and should take back power and prevail. But it's important to understand how their role can also be deeply misogynistic when used to compare the good girl with the wild girl," end quote. And because I always value Mads' opinion on everything above all else, you can also follow her Bookstagram at Sonrisa Library, and I'll link that in the description.
What's a Bookstagram?
A Bookstagram is an account where people read books and then post their reviews of them. And of course, by nature of the beast, there will be some spoilers today, so proceed with caution.
First spoiler right now.
Okay.
During Mad's quote, we heard that the final girl, according to the trope, has to lose everything. And for the most part, that's true. But my personal favorite final girl did a great job of not doing that.
Who's your favorite final girl?
Ripley from Alien. She protects Jonesy the cat.
Well, I think it's not, I don't think Mads is saying they always lose everything.
I know,
but
it's the trope.
Everything.
But like the hero's job is to, defeat the villain, but also protect the others, right? As a macro.
Sure.
So the peak final girl is the one that survives and helps the others survive in the process.
Well, we're going to talk about a lot today the evolution from the final girl as survivor to hero, right? I think in a lot of the early things, she simply survived through it.
Yep.
And by Ripley, which is a great example, and Sarah Connor's another kind of non-horror example, you have them acting as heroes, right? And not just kind of like survivors.
Sure.
So let's talk about some sources very quickly. There's a book from 1992, one we've already talked about today, Men, Women, and Chainsaws by Carol J. Clover. There's a fandom article, Halloween Flips the Final Girl Trope on Its Head by Kim Taylor Foster, an in-session film article by Cody Allen, The Scream Queen's Legacy, Janet Leigh and the Evolution of Horror, and a Dread Central article by Mary Beth McAndrews, Jess's Choice, How Black Christmas Responsibly Addresses Abortion and Bodily Autonomy. So as always, let's take a step back, right? Because we're tracing this trope through history. That's what we do on this podcast. So I think there's some important precursors to the trope from Gothic literature that help to set the stage for the evolution of the final girl. This is one of my favorite books because I took a whole seminar on it in college. But Jane Eyre is not a horror story. But Jane shares traits that would later appear in Final Girls, right? Intelligence, independence, resourcefulness, and the ability to survive isolation and danger.
Spoilers. I have a confession.
You've never read it.
I've never read it.
I never thought you would have.
So many other literary works that you would typically read in high school, I made a point of like going back later in life and going through them because some of them are so incredible that are honestly wasted on a high school age mind.
Yeah.
But you read it later in life and like, wow.
Have you ever read any Bronte, Charlotte or Emily?
No. They've done others?
Wuthering Heights, to name one.
Oh, I didn't like the movie.
What movie?
The Wuthering Heights movie.
The new one?
Yeah.
You watched it?
No.
Oh. I would suggest reading Villette. That is my favorite Charlotte Bronte novel.
Oh, you do like that book.
Yeah.
You talk about it a lot.
So throughout Jane Eyre, she repeatedly faces danger, isolation, and uncertainty, but she continues to endure. Jane Eyre is important as a precursor because Gothic fiction often centered on women trapped in threatening environments, and they survived through quick thinking and determination rather than physical power. Those ideas would later become central to horror's final girls. Another example, Laura, the narrator of Carmilla, can also be viewed as an early precursor to the trope. Carmilla was published in 1872. It was shared in Lefaunu's novella, which predates Dracula and many of the conventions of modern horror. I love Carmilla, and if you haven't read it, it's a very short, easy, delightful read. So Laura survives an encounter with a supernatural predator, and she lives to tell the story. Laura also occupies a position common to many Gothic heroines and later final girls. She is isolated from the outside world, and this idea of isolation becomes important, living with her father in a remote castle. Many later horror films place their final girls in similarly secluded environments, where escape and outside help are limited. At the same time, Laura differs from the modern final girl in important ways. She does not directly defeat Carmilla herself. Instead, a group of male authority figures investigate the attack and uncover Carmilla's identity. They end up being the ones to destroy the vampire.
Spoilers.
I told you there's going to be spoilers today.
No one knew that there was going to be a vampire.
It's important to note, though, like I'm going to only try to say the spoilers that I think are important to this conversation, which is that even though she's a precursor for the final girl, again, like a group of men come in and actually save the day.
Right, because otherwise it'd be indecent.
Laura survives, but she is more often the victim of the threat than the person who actively defeats it. This one's a little bit of a stretch, but it came to mind for me, and I think it's worth noting. There's an unnamed narrator of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. This can be viewed as a Gothic version of the final girl archetype. Stick with me. So Rebecca was published in 1938. The novel is not a traditional horror story, but it's traditional enough, right, to be turned into a Hitchcock film later, which I certainly would say is horror. And it uses many elements found in Gothic fiction. Threatening house, this very mysterious past, right? You may also be somewhat familiar with the plot of Rebecca if you've ever been to Sleep No More.
What's that?
Sleep No More is one of the best immersive shows ever made in all time.
Or was?
It's still running in Korea and in Shanghai.
Is it really?
Yes.
Are you going to go?
I would love to.
Is it in Korean or Mandarin?
I think it's not, but there's also just very little speaking, you know?
Oh, that's true.
So I
Yeah,
think
it
you
doesn't
can
really
still
matter.
get the point, yeah. Like later final girls, the narrator must confront a threat that controls her environment and survive the psychological pressure it creates. And this is probably the most direct example. So in Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was published in 1897, Mina faces a supernatural threat. She survives an attack by a monster and plays a key role in defeating him. Mina actively investigates the danger and helps organize the effort to destroy Dracula. Mina is cautious, intelligent, and able to remain calm under extreme circumstances. While other characters are killed or weakened by Dracula, Mina survives the encounter and helps bring about his destruction. Her survival is not based on luck, but on her ability to recognize danger and respond to it. However, Mina also reflects the limitations of Victorian Gothic fiction. She is protected by the male characters around her, and the novel often frames her survival through traditional ideas about femininity and purity. Unlike many modern final girls who physically confront or defeat their attackers, Mina's strength comes from her own smarts, loyalty, and ability to help others to work together. Despite these differences, Mina Harker is one of the clearest literary predecessors to the final girl. Her role in Dracula connects the Gothic heroine of the 19th century with the survivor figures who would become central to 20th century horror. But early horror films expanded this trope even further and brought us closer to the modern-day final girl. Ellen, from Nosferatu in 1922, is often cited as one of the earliest horror heroines who resembles a final girl in film. In Nosferatu, she realizes the danger posed by Count Orlok and ultimately sacrifices herself to stop him. By keeping the vampire occupied until sunrise, she causes his destruction.
How does she do that?
Lovemaking. Unlike many later final girls, Ellen dies in the process, but she is the character most directly responsible for defeating the monster. Directed by Alfred Hitchcock, The Lodger in 1927 is a silent film, and there's actually another 1944 version, but the silent film version centers on fear surrounding a serial killer. I also just think it's crazy to think about the fact that Hitchcock directed a silent movie and people don't talk about that enough.
We talked about it.
I know, but
on the Hitchcock
people
episode.
aren't talking about it enough.
Well, why would they talk about it if it's a silent film?
Oh, good point. Good point. Daisy Bunting is a character that becomes a potential victim but ends up surviving the threat. While she's not a final girl in the modern sense, the film introduces themes that would later become central to slasher films, including a female character pursued by a murderer. And although The Cat and the Canary from 1927 is often classified as a comedy mystery with gothic elements and not pure horror, its heroine, Annabelle West, functions in ways that anticipates later final girls. She inherits a mansion, becomes the target of a mysterious threat, survives attacks, and uncovers the truth behind the danger. Of course, the character of Mina from Dracula also appears in the 1931 film adaptation. But in the 1960s and 70s, we start to see proto-final girls in film. So let's talk about that. And this example is one that Clover, right, the woman who coined the term, talks about quite a bit in her book. Marion Crane from Psycho is often discussed in relation to the final girl, but largely because she breaks the pattern that audiences later came to expect. For the first third of the film, Marion appears to be the protagonist. The story follows her as she steals money, flees town, and eventually arrives at the Bates Hotel. There's some tells here, right, that she's not maybe the final girl in the way that modern-day slasher movies look at that because, again, which is all misogynistic and whatever, but because she has sex at the beginning of the movie, she steals money, she is not pure of heart, right? Not that any of those things make her,
certainly not.
Stealing money is a little bad. Okay. Viewers are encouraged to believe that she will remain the central character and survive the story. Instead, she is murdered in the famous shower scene, a shocking twist that changed horror cinema. The character who becomes closest to a final girl in Psycho is Marion's sister, Lila Crane. After Marion disappears, Lila begins investigating what happened to her. Like later final girls, she becomes determined to uncover the truth. She follows clues, enters dangerous locations, and ultimately discovers the identity of the killer. Lila shares several traits with later final girls identified by Carol Clover. She is smart, curious, and resourceful. She survives long enough to uncover the secret at the center of the story and becomes the audience's point of identification during the film's final act. The climactic basement sequence, in which she confronts the truth about Norman Bates, resembles the later slasher convention of a female survivor uncovering the killer's hidden identity. But, womp womp, Lila is not a fully developed final girl in the modern sense. She does not defeat Norman herself. Sam Loomis physically restrains Norman before he can attack her. This is one of two Sam Loomi that are going to steal the thunder from Final Girls.
I was going to say, I've never put that together, that it's the same name.
Yeah. This means that, like many gothic heroines before her, Lila uncovers the threat but relies on a male character for the final rescue. That's why I said womp womp.
What a jerk.
Psycho is important in the history of the final girl because it helped establish several elements that later become central to slasher movies. A psychologically disturbed killer, a focus on female victims, suspense built around a dangerous house, and a surviving woman who discovers the truth. Right? So that's really a precursor to slasher films, but these things go hand in hand. Many scholars view Lila Crane as a transitional figure between the gothic survival heroines of earlier literature and the more independent final girls who would emerge in such films such as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween. In that sense, Psycho occupies an important place in the evolution of this trope. Marion Crane demonstrates that the apparent heroine is not guaranteed to survive, while Lila Crane provides an early example of the investigative, surviving female protagonist who would become a defining feature of later horror movies. But let's talk a little bit more about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974.
Do we have to?
I don't love this movie. I know people do, and we're going to talk about it.
Okay, I want to bring up that due to an upcoming episode that we cannot discuss just yet, I've had to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Uh-huh.
And I was really steeling myself for this because the first one, like we both agree, it's one of the hardest movies to watch.
Especially like the beginning. I mean, the whole thing, but
yeah,
especially the beginning. It's like deeply uncomfortable for me.
The dinner scene, my God. However, the second one gets so silly, so campy. It's not a reversal of direction. It's just they really lean into just like, this is like a bunch of silly killing.
Well, I think that's what all of these slasher franchises figured out, right? Like, they all get silly and campy. And Texas Chainsaw, I think, realized, like, if they want to continue to make sequels, they can't all be very difficult to watch.
Sure.
People want to have fun.
People, especially girls. That's all. It's very fresh in the mind because I
Great.
just watched it.
Perfect. Sally from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is widely considered one of the first true final girls in horror cinema, and one of the most important predecessors to Laurie Strode in Halloween. Throughout the film, Sally and her friends travel through rural Texas and gradually encounter Leatherface and his family. One by one, the other members of the group are killed, leaving Sally as the sole survivor. This structure became one of the defining features of the final girl archetype. A group is targeted by a killer. A single woman survives after witnessing the deaths of everyone around her. Sally also embodies many of Carol Clover's final girl traits. She is resourceful, alert to danger, and determined to survive. Once she realizes the threat she is facing, the film shifts almost entirely to her struggle to escape. The audience experiences much of the final act through her perspective, a technique that would become common in later slasher films. Unlike many later final girls, however, Sally does not defeat the killer. She spends much of the film running, hiding, and trying to escape. In the final scene, she survives by fleeing Leatherface and climbing into the back of a passing pickup truck.
And then we get to see him just like swing his chainsaw in the air and do his little dance for like half an hour.
Leatherface remains alive, and Sally's victory is survival itself, rather than the destruction of the monster. This distinction is important because Sally represents an early version of the final girl, and later characters will fight back more directly. Sally's role is more focused on endurance. The film's famous ending, in which she escapes while laughing and screaming hysterically, emphasizes the psychological cost of survival. She has escaped, but she is clearly traumatized by what she's experienced, which I think is like an important piece of this to take with you. There's a book called The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix, which I highly recommend. I really loved it. And I think this point sort of like the premise of the book is what happens to the final girls after they survive. And he changes, right, the identities of kind of like the most famous final girls and plays with like how the trauma has affected all of them differently. And it's a fun read, even though it gives you a lot to think about. So this is, the ending of Texas Chainsaw makes me think of that too.
Sure.
Another early slasher example is Black Christmas, which also came out in 1974. Jess Bradford from Black Christmas is an even clearer example of the archetype than Sally, some would say.
Do we need to talk about Black Christmas?
I know
It's too scary.
These are important to the history of
it's
what we're
too scary,
facing
Abby.
here. I know. I really don't like the phone calls in Black Christmas.
I just find the movie painfully boring.
I don't find it boring. I feel like Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw are similar. And it's interesting because also in a little bit to the original When a Stranger Calls, it's like some of these early movies that kind of predate the slasher boom are, to me, way harder to watch than like a Halloween or a Friday the 13th because there's something very personal. Like, to me, they feel like things that could happen, I guess.
That makes sense.
Or like there's some realism to them.
And just like real life, they don't necessarily follow formulas.
If this isn't quite enough chaotic horror and history content to scratch your itch, consider joining our Patreon. We have a ton of fun creating bonus episodes, writing essays that explore some of our favorite horror topics, and presenting spooky classic literature. Plus, all new members get a welcome package in the mail, a lifetime discount to our merch store, and new stickers whenever we have new designs to share. Head to patreon.com/Lunatics Project to join. Yeah, and like, the follow-ups, I guess, are more my speed.
Sure.
Even though they're more graphic or equally as graphic. Like Sally, Jess is the last major female survivor of a group targeted by a killer. Throughout the film, members of her sorority house are stalked and murdered by an unseen attacker known only as Billy. As the body count rises, Jess becomes increasingly aware that something is wrong and begins trying to understand the threat. The audience experiences much of the film through her perspective, especially during the final act. What makes Jess particularly significant is that she possesses, again, many of these traits that Carol Clover defined. She is smart, independent, observant, and willing to challenge authority figures. Unlike some earlier horror heroines, her character is not defined primarily by romance. One of the film's central storylines involves Jess's decision to have an abortion, despite pressure from her boyfriend Peter, emphasizing her independence and personal agency. Black Christmas was unusually progressive for its time, because it presents Jess's decision to have this abortion as her own choice, rather than a moral failing or tragedy. Think about Dirty Dancing, right?
Sure.
When Jess tells her boyfriend Peter that she is pregnant and plans to have an abortion, she is direct and confident about her decision. The film treats her choice as an expression of bodily autonomy, rather than something that she should feel ashamed of. Jess also actively investigates the danger around her. She takes the threatening phone calls seriously, notices suspicious behavior, and attempts to protect herself as the situation becomes more dangerous. This makes her more proactive than many earlier Gothic heroines, who often discovered the truth only after others intervened. At the same time, Black Christmas predates the fully developed slasher formula that would become standard after Halloween. The film's ending is famously ambiguous. Jess survives the immediate events of the story, but Billy is never caught. And the final scene suggests the danger may not be over. Unlike later Final Girls, who definitively defeat or escape the killer, Jess's survival remains uncertain. For many horror historians, Jess is one of the strongest candidates for the first modern Final Girl. Black Christmas was released only a few months before the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Jess combines traits that would later become standard in the archetype. She's the primary survivor. She recognizes the threat, she investigates the mystery, and the climax centers on her confrontation with what she believes is the killer. If Sally, from Texas Chainsaw, established the image of the lone survivor fleeing unimaginable horror, Jess helped establish the image of the intelligent, resourceful woman who actively tries to understand and confront the threat. Together, the two characters laid much of the groundwork for Laurie Strode in Halloween and the many Final Girls who followed.
It's quite impressive.
All right, Alan, let's get into some movies that you like. How about that?
I like Halloween.
You make fun of me for how much I talk about Halloween, but this is important for this topic.
When have I ever made fun of you?
Almost every time I bring it up, you sigh deeply.
It's not true.
Film scholar Carol J. Clover argued that during the Final Girl's confrontation with the killer, the audience's perspective shifts. Earlier in the film, viewers often see events through the killer's point of view, but by the climax, they are encouraged to identify with the final girl as she fights for survival. She is also frequently shown using a weapon, often one with symbolic masculine associations, to defend herself.
Such as a clothes hanger.
Well, I mean, Laurie's a little, but she has a knitting needle and a clothes hanger, right? They're not, but she also ends up with the butcher's knife.
Sure.
What's like the most masculine horror weapon that you can think of? Chainsaw?
A chainsaw is masculine?
More masculine than a knitting needle.
I think Freud would disagree.
Why?
Anything that impales would be more masculine than something that cuts.
But I mean, a chainsaw is phallic in its shape.
Sure, but it slices.
So you think, what about a knife though? A knife
impales
or slices.
You right, but typically you are entering the sanctity of someone's body, against their will.
Well, I mean,
usually.
with either weapon, really.
Sure.
Clover suggested that many slasher films of the 1970s and 80s reflected the expectations of a largely male audience. According to her analysis, these films created a character who combined traditionally female and masculine traits. The final girl experiences fear and vulnerability, but she also becomes active and confrontational in the final act. This shift allows the audience to support her survival while still fitting within the common gender conventions in horror of that era. The ending often leaves the killer's fate uncertain or suggests that the threat may return. This unresolved conclusion becomes a common feature of the slasher genre and helped set up for future sequels. It also led to future development of Final Girl characters across multiple films, allowing the trope to evolve over time. Laurie Strode from Halloween is often considered one of the most influential Final Girls in horror history.
She's pretty good.
While earlier films featured surviving female protagonists, Halloween helped popularize the slasher formula and brought the Final Girl archetype to a much wider audience.
You know, it'd be such a fun reboot of the series?
What?
If Jamie Lee Curtis and Michael Myers
switch
Freaky Friday'd.
Yeah, that would be so good. Oh, man, that would be so good.
And then he has to, go to work.
But she doesn't work, right? She, lives in a bunker at the end.
That's true. At the end, you're right. Well, no, if it was like maybe they remade the first movie.
Oh, back in the 70s?
Yeah, it's like yeah, somehow. And then like Michael Myers has to do babysitting and make popcorn.
He has to carve the pumpkin with the kid.
He's probably good at carving.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
I think she would be really bad at killing people.
Well, she'll get there.
I know, but she's pretty loud. You know, she's not really a sneaker.
She does moan a lot, I guess, when she runs. That's just because she's so scared.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, if
she's quieter than her friends.
If she jumps out at somebody and they scream, she's gonna scream back.
I feel like she'd get smart.
Yeah, she does get. That's
get their
true.
Ankles,
that's true.
You know? Yeah.
I mean, she doesn't have to though. She's so strong.
Oh right. They're switching bodies too. That would be really funny.
I just don't think she would master the slow, deliberate walk. She's more of a sprinter.
Yeah,
which is actually kind of terrifying when you think about it.
Like a really fast
Michael Myers,
Mike Myers,
but just like really fast.
Well, I guess we don't know if the slow walk is a physical limitation or a choice that he makes. Because if it's a physical limitation, then she couldn't walk faster.
There's a later movie where we see him go fast. I can't remember which, but like I don't know, maybe it's like one of the Rob Zombie ones or something.
Yeah.
But I remember it's like it's a surprise that you see him go so quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's horrifying. Throughout the film, Laurie is portrayed as responsible, observant, and cautious. Unlike her friends, she notices signs that something is wrong long before she fully understands the danger.
What do these bodies hanging on doors mean?
She repeatedly sees Michael Myers watching her from a distance and senses that she's being followed. As the threat becomes more and more obvious, the audience increasingly experiences the story through Laurie's perspective, making her the emotional center of the film. Unlike Laurie, her friends do not recognize the danger around them and dismiss her concerns. When Michael finally makes his move, Laurie proves to be resilient. She protects the children in her care, escapes from several attacks, and fights back when necessary. She uses ordinary objects, like we said, a knitting needle and a coat hanger to defend herself. These moments become defining features of later final girls, who often survive through quick thinking and determination rather than physical strength. It's also important, I think Laurie, we mentioned this a little bit, but Laurie is kind of the epitome of this quote-unquote pious final girl, where her friends are drinking, they're having sex, they're partying when they're supposed to be doing other things. She ends up babysitting the kids they're supposed to be babysitting, right? And they're the ones who die. And her, who is portrayed as virginal and sexless, to quote Mads earlier, she survives.
Well, the kids survive.
I know. The kids also survive, but I'm saying there's a bit of misogyny here to say, like, oh, if you have sex, you deserve to die, and we're not going to kill Laurie because she's virginal, so she's worth more.
Yeah, it's such an established trope, and I really wonder why.
Well, I think it's because of that. I think there's this, like, undertone of misogyny. It's to say if you're engaging in those things, then your death is less meaningful. As the slasher genre evolved during the 1980s, some final girls became more proactive in confronting their attackers. Characters such as Ginny Field in Friday the 13th Part 2 and Nancy Thompson in A Nightmare on Elm Street actively developed strategies to defeat the killers pursuing them. Laurie represents an earlier stage of the archetype. Her primary goal is survival. Rather than hunting Michael or creating a plan to destroy him, which she does in later films, she spends the climax trying to escape, protect herself, protect the kids, and stay alive. The film's ending also reflects this early version of the final girl. Laurie does not defeat him herself. During the final confrontation, again, another man named Dr. Samuel Loomis arrives and shoots Michael several times. The exact amount of times that he shoots him is contested, causing him to fall from a second-story balcony. When Loomis looks over the edge moments later, Michael has disappeared. The scene allows Laurie to survive while preserving Michael as an ongoing threat and, of course, unlocks the ability for sequels. Unlike many later final girls who achieve a clear victory over the villain, Laurie's success is simply enduring. Laurie's importance comes not only from her survival, but from the influence that she had on the genre. After Halloween, the image of a young woman facing a seemingly unstoppable killer became one of the defining conventions of slasher films. Many later final girls would become more aggressive and self-reliant, but Laurie provided one of the clearest and most influential examples of the archetype. Her smarts, resilience, and ability to survive overwhelming danger helped establish the foundation for decades of horror heroines that followed. Alice Hardy from Friday the 13th is another incredibly important example. As the sole survivor of the original Friday the 13th, Alice helped establish the final girl as a standard feature of the slasher genre. And she's also an interesting, I guess, somewhat similar to Texas Chainsaw, where we see the impact, the psychological impact that this had on her.
Mm-hmm.
While Laurie Strode and Halloween helped popularize the archetype, Friday the 13th demonstrated how the formula could be repeated and expanded. Throughout the film, Alice is presented as an ordinary camp counselor who becomes increasingly aware that something is wrong as her friends disappear. By the end of the story, she is the only survivor left at Camp Crystal Lake. Like many later final girls, Alice discovers the truth behind the murderers and becomes the focus of the killer's attention during the film's climax. I think this is important. I think it's like something I've been saying, but I just want to clarify. There's this quality with some of these final girls, right? This is what Lila Crane sort of originated. Laurie Strode does this, where Laurie at one point rips the mask off Michael and kind of we get to see his face for the first time.
He doesn't like that.
He doesn't. And similarly, Alice discovers, right, she's the one person who finds out who this killer is in the first Friday the 13th movie.
It's Michael.
But there is this like quality of a lot of these final girls of discovering the truth or the intentions, right? And being the sole person with that information too. Alice is also notable because she actively fights back against the killer. She defends herself during a prolonged confrontation. The climax ends with Alice decapitating the killer, making her one of the earliest final girls to directly kill the villain rather than simply escape. This helped establish a pattern that would become common in later slasher films, where the final girl not only survives, but also physically confronts the threat. Friday the 13th was a major commercial success and helped turn the slasher film into one of the dominant horror subgenres of the 1980s.
Well, yeah, when you make a movie for like $7, as long as you sell one ticket, you're good.
Yeah, but these, like, both Halloween and Friday the 13th were made, we have series on them, but were made for very little money at the beginning and just, like, made millions and millions back.
Mm-hmm. And I will say Friday the 13th did a really pretty good job of having a long through line throughout the series.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, things get a little wonky or get rebooted or whatever, but they continue from the original mythos pretty well. Halloween probably has a deeper one, despite the fact that Halloween 3 doesn't even have Michael Myers.
Yeah.
So ignoring that. But like you're talking about how, like, you know, just a camp counselor that becomes like a hunter later, it becomes pretty thorough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's a good point. That's, I think, one of the things about these franchises that are fun. Like when we sat down and watched all those for those series, of the first of all these franchises are very like backstory light. And then they get to kind of fill it in as they get budget and all that. And of course it's ridiculous, but it's fun. Ginny Field in Friday the 13th Part 2 from 1981 developed the role further by using intelligence and psychological tactics to defeat Jason Voorhees. Nancy Thompson, in A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, became one of the most proactive final girls, researching Freddy Krueger and creating a plan to fight back against him. Other examples include Chris Higgins in Friday the 13th Part 3 from 1982, who survives Jason's attacks and fights back during the final confrontation, and Stretch in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 from 1986, who faces Leatherface and his family directly. These films, again, evolved the character even further. They almost become like Nancy Drew's, right? They become like...
Nancy Drew?
They become like a little bit more like investigative, I would say.
Well, they become proactive, not reactive.
Yeah, exactly. In Alien from 1979, Ripley begins as the warrant officer of the Nostromo and becomes the last surviving member of the crew after the alien creature kills the others. Like earlier final girls, she notices danger before others do. She adapts quickly and she uses whatever tools she has available to stay alive. However, Ripley differs from many earlier examples because she takes command during the crisis. She attempts to enforce safety procedures, investigate the alien threat, and ultimately confronts the creature herself. So I think we can see pretty clearly the evolution here, right? You have Laurie, who just survives. Laurie, Sally, Jess, Bradford, right? They just survive, they endure, they get through it. Then you start to have some of the people that we just talked about in Texas Chainsaw Part 2 and Friday the 13th Part 3, who again become like Nancy Drews. They're investigating, they're proactive. And then you get Ripley, right? And it's like a whole nother thing. Ripley is not just there to survive. She's there to like fuck shit up, right?
Yeah, she is. But in Ripley's defense, you know, she's not some action movie hero. Her best option for survival is to go on the offensive. You know, a good defense is a good offense. You know, there is no escape. She's stuck on this spaceship.
Yeah.
So there's no level of avoiding or hiding that's going to be a long-term solution.
Yes, but there's also just like something different about Ripley than Laurie Strode.
Right. No sleeves.
But like Ripley, not to like whatever reduce you, but like Ripley is jacked. She's more masculine. She's less feminine. If we're thinking about these things in a binary,
And she has a cat.
she has a cat. and what's interesting that we know because we did the series on Alien, the character was originally written as a man and it was switched out. So
Right.
I think because of that, there's just less of the like standard traits, right? Because it was written differently.
Yeah, which I'm still very torn about. Yes, the original character was intended as a man, but then like when they swapped to Ripley being a woman, they didn't really change much.
That's what I mean.
Right. And so it's like, was it because it was written as a man, or was it because it was like just a good character that was gender neutral?
Right. Well, I think that's like what it comes down to. It's like more films like that, like more films where the gender, I mean, I think gender is important in all of these things and, you know, identity is important, but like they're just more films where there's less of a binary, please, or more films where we follow the same formula, please.
Yeah, it does. I'm thinking about the overall final girl trope and how it's probably just a lot easier for an audience to watch a woman go through all this hardship.
Exactly. Because they're misogynistic.
Because I'm thinking about like, what is a similar situation of person trapped in situation with creature, but it's a man. I think of Predator. So you have the Predator aliens or the Yautja.
Ooh, that's a fun word.
I don't know where that actually comes into play. If it's just if it's in the movies or just lore or whatever.
Sure.
But you have a whole race of aliens that just hunt for sport. But you have a similar situation of very predatory thing, lone person who has to survive and decides to go on the offense. And like there's a lot of close calls in Predator. But I'm thinking of like when Ripley has a close call, you see her like freak out. I'm trying to remember if she actually cries or not, but she's like clearly panicking at certain points.
Yeah.
At no point do you see Arnold Schwarzenegger cry in panic.
Right.
Just because it's uncomfortable to watch such a masculine figure go through that.
Well, we need more of that.
We need softer men.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. If I really wonder, had a man done the performance of Ripley as originally intended, would the movie be successful? I don't think so.
What I wonder is if a man played Ripley just as it was played, right?
Yes, that's what I mean.
Where maybe there's panic and they cry, if you, as a human being, would have cried more than once in your lifetime. You know what I mean?
We'll see.
Would it have given you permission?
Hard to say.
By the end of the film, right, by the end of Alien, Ripley is not simply rescued or escaping by chance. She had actively defeats the alien and ensures her own survival. Ripley's character helped redefine the final girl by showing that a female horror protagonist could be a capable leader and action hero. Sarah Connor in The Terminator from 1984 represents another major shift in the final girl archetype, and I know it's not horror. We're going to move past it. At the beginning of the film, Sarah is an ordinary young woman who is unaware that she is being hunted. Like many earlier final girls, she is initially vulnerable and must survive an unstoppable threat. However, as the film progresses, she transforms into a more active survivor. She learns the truth about the Terminator.
From Kyle Reese.
Again, very Nancy Drew of her. Adapts to the danger and ultimately destroys the machine pursuing her.
What do you mean Nancy Drew of her? Kyle Reese just tells her everything.
I don't know.
He's like, here's how it is. And she's like, that's not true. And he's like, trust me. And then the Terminator just like fucks shit up. And she's like, I believe you now.
Well, she got there, right? Unlike earlier final girls whose stories ended once they escaped, Sarah's survival becomes the beginning of her transformation into a warrior figure, which is explored further in Terminator 2: Judgment Day, one of Alan's favorite movies.
It's so good.
Both Ripley and Sarah Connor are significant because they push the final girl beyond the boundaries of the slasher genre. They evolve the trope from survivor to hero. Jumping ahead to 1996 to Scream and self-aware horror. That plays with this trope even more because it's aware of it, right? Sidney Prescott from Scream represents a new phase in the development of the final girl. Released after the peak of the 70s and 80s slasher boom, Scream both followed and challenged the conventions established by earlier horror films. Sidney is aware of the rules of the genre because the film itself comments on slasher traditions. But she is not simply a passive survivor. Throughout the film, she investigates the murders, questions the people around her, and confronts the killers directly. Unlike earlier final girls who often survives through escape, her character also becomes important because she continued to survive across multiple films, making her one of the most enduring final girls in horror history. Scream helped revive the slasher genre in the 1990s by combining traditional horror elements with self-awareness and created a model for final girls who are both survivors and active participants in their own stories. There's also a few academic debates among film critics and historians around how to talk about this trope, right? So I want to talk about some of that.
Mm-hmm.
Some critics later expanded on Clover's idea with the concept of the final woman, describing survivors who continue beyond the original horror event and develop as full protagonists. The term final woman is a later concept used by some critics to describe a broader evolution of the final girl. While the final girl is often defined by surviving a specific horror scenario, the final woman emphasizes characters who continue beyond the immediate threat and develop as complete protagonists, right? So like Laurie Strode over the course of 100 movies.
Mm-hmm.
The final woman is not only someone who survives violence, but someone who gains agency, independence, and control over her own story over time. Characters like Ripley in Alien, Sarah Connor, and Sidney Prescott are often discussed as examples of this evolution. The difference can also be understood through the character's role in the story. A final girl is usually defined by the horror event itself. She is the last survivor of the killer's attack. A final woman is defined by what happens afterward. She survives, changes, adapts, and continues to exist beyond the trauma. The shift reflects a broader change in horror, where female characters moved from being primarily victims who survived into protagonists who drive the action. However, the terms are not mutually exclusive. Many characters can be both final girls and final women. Again, Laurie Strode, for example, begins as a final girl in Halloween, but later films such as Halloween in 2018 and its sequels reframe her as a final woman by focusing on her life after the original attack and her continued fight against Michael Myers.
You've seen the new Screams.
Yes.
Does Courtney Cox return?
I think she does, yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah, I think some of the new Screams are great because they give the audiences what they want, you know? That's what we want in a franchise. Scholars have argued that while the final girl was an important step in giving women central roles in horror, the classic version of the character often reflected a narrow idea of who was allowed to survive. Carol J. Clover's original analysis of the final girl primarily focused on white, heterosexual women in the 1970s and 1980s slasher films. Critics have since examined the limitations of this model, arguing that horror cinema often positioned white women as sympathetic survivors, while women of color were more likely to be killed, marginalized, or placed in supporting roles. One major area of discussion is the Black final girl and the underrepresentation of Black women as central survivors in horror. Critics have pointed out that Black characters in classic horror often had different narrative roles than white final girls. They were frequently absent from the final confrontation or killed before the climax, reinforcing patterns where whiteness was associated with survival. Films like Night of the Living Dead, with characters like Barbara and Ben, are often discussed in relation to race and survival. Later films such as Candyman and Scream 2 contributed to conversations about expanding who can occupy central roles in horror. Another part of the debate focuses on whether simply changing the identity of the final girl is enough. Some scholars argue that diversity should not mean placing different characters into the same traditional role without examining the systems and themes around them. A more diverse final girl can challenge older horror conventions by bringing different experiences, cultural backgrounds, and perspectives into stories about survival. Modern horror has increasingly experimented with expanding the archetype. Characters such as Adelaide Wilson in Us, Grace in Ready or Not, and Mia in Evil Dead have been discussed as examples of newer survivor heroines who do not fit the traditional final girl model. These characters often have more complicated motivations, identities, and relationships to violence. There is also debate around the idea that the final girl itself was originally a complicated figure.
What do you mean?
Clover argued that audiences, regardless of gender, are encouraged to identify with the final girl during the final confrontation. Some scholars have questioned whether this framework applies equally when the survivor is not a white woman, suggesting that race and cultural context influence how audiences interpret vulnerability, fear, and survival. When looking at where the final girl trope has evolved to now in horror, one major change is that modern final girls are often active participants rather than passive survivors. Characters like Erin in You're Next, who uses survival skills and tactical thinking to turn the tables on her attackers, and Grace again in Ready or Not, who actively fights against the family hunting her. I'm also thinking about, I forget her name, but the character in The Menu.
Oh, with the eyes.
With the eyes. Another major development is that the final girl is now defined by trauma and what happens after the survival. Earlier slashers usually ended once the killer was defeated or the survivor escaped. Modern horror frequently explores the consequences of surviving. Laurie Strode's later appearances in the Halloween franchise are a clear example. In Halloween, Laurie is no longer simply the young woman who survived Michael Myers. She is a character whose entire life has been shaped by that experience. The story examines how survival can affect identity and mental health. And, in a great way, modern horror has also expanded who can be a final girl. The classic archetype was largely built around white, heterosexual women. But contemporary films have introduced final girls with different racial, cultural, and gender identities. Again, Adelaide Wilson in Us, Sam Carpenter in Scream represent different approaches to survival and identity. In The Babadook, Amelia is a survivor of grief and trauma rather than just a monster. In Train to Busan, Sue-Ann's survival complicates who gets to be the final survivor. In The Girl with All the Gifts, Melanie is a very different kind of survivor. Another evolution is the idea that the final girl does not always have to be traditionally good or morally pure. The early archetype was often associated with being cautious, right, separate from the behavior that led other characters to their deaths. Modern horror has challenged this idea by creating survivors who are flawed, angry, traumatized, and morally ambiguous. Characters like Danny in Midsommar and Pearl in Pearl complicate that idea that the final girl always must be pious. Some scholars also argue that the final girl has expanded into the final person or final survivor. Films like Get Out and The Invisible Man place survivors from different backgrounds at the center of horror narratives, while focusing on themes like abuse, power, and social control. Another example, Jordan Peele's Get Out challenged traditional ideas that the final girl has to be a girl by centering Chris Washington, a male survivor whose story uses many of the same conventions: isolation, discovery of a hidden threat, and a final confrontation. Overall, the modern final girl is less about simply being the last person alive and more about how a character responds to fear, violence, and trauma. The archetype has expanded from the lone survivor running from a killer into a broader symbol of resilience, resistance, adaptation, and reclaiming control after an experience designed to take it away.
Well, Abby, what kind of final girl do you think you'd be?
Do you think I'd survive?
No.
Really? You don't think so?
I don't know. You're pretty scrappy.
I think I could survive. I think if it was like Mike Myers, I could survive.
Okay, it's you and Michael Myers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, Mike Myers is much easier than Michael Myers.
The actor.
He's kind of funny.
Yeah, okay.
But you versus Michael Myers.
Okay.
You're in a factory.
Okay.
What do?
Is it an active factory?
No.
Abandoned.
Abandoned.
Is there any electricity?
Yes.
I put him through the machines.
You put him through. How do you get him there?
I put a banana peel on the ground.
Ooh, classic. You Bugs Bunny him.
Been watching a lot of Scooby-Doo lately, yeah.
Smart. So you go all Nancy Drew on his ass.
Yeah, Nancy Drew, Scooby-Doo, Velma, and I get him right through the machine, and then we flip him upside down, we take off his mask, and we realize that he's the owner of the factory all along.
Yep. Smart. Wow, you're 3 steps ahead.
He's just trying to get some kind of tax incentive.
Isn't he always? Sorry, that's a spoiler for Halloween 4. I would also like to shout out that if you would like a final girl experience of your own,
Ooh.
you can play the hit board game series Final Girl.
Oh, that's true. That's been a fun board game series.
Yep. It's technically a solo board game,
Yep.
but we just play it as a team.
Yep.
And then you just make all the choices that you would as a Final Girl.
And it's fun because if you get into it, there's tons of different like versions, so you can play like multiple times.
Yes, they've made expansions for basically every horror IP there is out there.
Yeah, exactly. Alan, I can't ask you how you would survive, I guess. But, I mean, do you think you'd survive?
No.
I don't either.
Not a chance.
You're too
I would, at best, I could
unadaptable.
provide the banana peels. Actually, just bananas, you would have to peel them.
I think you're very smart, but I don't think that you adapt well.
What are you talking about?
You're not very observant.
I'm very observant.
I guess my question for you is, do you have a favorite Final Girl?
Yeah, Ripley.
Yeah. Okay, what about next?
I really enjoyed Ready or Not.
So good.
That's a very fun one. I'm excited to see the sequel.
Yeah.
Yeah, like again, we've talked about my personal favorite trope. Someone is hunted for the majority of the movie by the indomitable monster, and then at some point they just say no more, and then just like, arm themselves and go to town. I love that.
Yeah, that's very fun. The Final Girl has changed dramatically since the days of early Gothic heroines and 1970s slashers. She began as a survivor who outlasted the killer, but she has evolved into a character who investigates, fights back, carries trauma, and sometimes becomes the force that defeats the threat. The Final Girl remains one of horror's most recognizable figures because she represents the genre's ability to explore fear, survival, and resilience through its central characters. The Final Girl has endured because she represents one of horror's central questions. When faced with impossible fear, who are we capable of becoming? And I just want to take a second to call back to those quotes from our friends at the beginning, because I just think it's the case with a lot of this that Final Girls, as with anything else in life, right, can mean multiple things to somebody at once. Like for me, I love that there's women in horror, that women are centered in horror. Of course, there's issues with that, right? But generally, I love that there's women centered in horror. I think there's room to expand that to include more diverse stories, but I love that part of it. And I think we're evolving in the right direction broadly. But I do think with horror, right, like there either is a survivor or there isn't, which just means a large number of movies, especially if they're following a slasher formula, will result in women survivors.
Even if you kill the big bad, either you get out of there or you don't. I'm thinking of like The Thing, where at the end they just decide to like, well, we're just going to take everyone down with us.
Right.
Just to make sure that there's no trace of the monster ever again. Jokes on them. But yeah, to your point, it's having just one person survive makes it effectively like a close game. Where, it came down to just that one last person. If they killed just one more person, then there'd be no survivors and the killer would have won.
Yeah. And so I think like because so many films are just going to organically tell that story, it's really the responsibility of the filmmakers, especially with where we are now in society, to decide how they handle those characters and how they portray those characters, right? And need to be consciously aware of all of those things. Thank you so much for being here, especially with our 200th episode. And if you somehow haven't heard the ad running on this podcast network, you can watch Voices Carry, a movie that I co-wrote and co-directed on Tubi for free right now. And I would say it does not follow the Final Girl trope, so.
That's a spoiler.
Maybe.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
All right, bye.
Bye. Looking for even more creepy content? Consider joining our Patreon for way more content just like this, including bonus episodes and very special deep dives. You can also join us on Discord if you want to stay involved in the conversation, and find our video content on YouTube, TikTok, or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere you like to get your social updates. And of course, head to lunaticsproject.com where you'll find our very, very spooky merch and links to everything you need to know.
Are you upset by our egregious fabrication of facts? Tell us about it on Discord.